Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today, as you can see, we've finally hit the triple digits. We're at part 100 for our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. We'll be taking a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So today, you can see we're part 100, so we've gone through 100 of all these mods. And I got to say thank you everyone for helping us reach this milestone. I believe the um, last time we got it, we didn't even get to really part 30. So it's nice that we get a lot more mods this time round, and hopefully we get a couple more of JWE2 kind of spotlights because I know Jurassic World Evolution 3, which I'm really excited for, is coming around the horizon, but it's a modding scene doesn't seem to have been slowing down that much. So hopefully there'll be a couple more before the release of Jurassic World Evolution 3. But I'd be really excited, to go through those with you. But yeah, there's a couple of the mods I really hope to show off someday. Yeah, let's get started. So Sweetener, if you remember, Sweetener made all sorts of really awesome themed packs for areas across the globe. Was working on a down under pack, so one like Australia, Antarctica, and things like that. And it was a really awesome pack, and I'm a little bit sad that it didn't manage to get fully made. But he's released them anyway, so we've got 3 species from that. So our first species we'll be looking at is Antarctopelta. Beautiful animal, isn't it? Amazing. So let's have a look at Antarctopelta. Which one should... let's have a look at you, because you're in the best position. So here is Antarctopelta. So Antarctopelta, which means Antarctic shield, these guys are a genus of ankylosaurian dinosaur, so related things like Ankylosaurus and things like that. From the Maastrichtian stage of the late Cretaceous, from what is now James Ross Island in Antarctica, and is the only known ankylosaur from Antarctica and the member of Panankylosauria, as we'll kind of get into. So, in terms of discovery and naming, it was first discovered as an expedition from James Ross Island off the coast of Antarctica, where an incomplete skeleton of an ankylosaur was discovered by Argentine paleontologists Eduardo Olivero and Robert Sascanzo in 1986 in January. However, excavations will not be finished for a decade due to ground frost and quite harsh weather conditions. So they found it in the Gamma member of the Snow Hill Island Formation. So this is a time that dates back down to the Maastrichtian, so right at the end of the time of dinosaurs in late Cretaceous. And the material all came from a single individual that was spread over 6 square meters area and collected over several field seasons. And the bones were heavily worn, sadly. And there were many fragmented bones and things like that. And also at the site there was a tooth unearthed of a shark notodon, which is probably scavenged on the ankylosaur as it went out to sea and decomposed. So the holotype itself is the only known example of this genus and species, and the first dinosaur known from Antarctica. It has 3 isolated teeth, parts of the lower jaw, another tooth in situ or in the jaw, some of the skull fragments, vertebrae of the neck, back, hips, and tail, some shoulder vertebrae, a thigh bone, foot and hand bones, and numerous pieces of armor. So this estimate is to be about 15% of the skeleton. So Antarctopelta material had been known for decades and written about in 3 separate publications, but it wasn't fully described as Antarctopelta olivoni until 2006, named by paleontologists Leonardo Salgado and Zolma Garaspari. And it was the second dinosaur genus named from Antarctica after Cryolophosaurus in 1993, even though it was found before that. Its genus name refers to the location of Antarctica, and pelta means kind of armored skin, and it's often used for ankylosaurs. You have Cedartopelta, Sauropelta, Borealopelta, things like that. and Olivier names Eduardo Olivier, who discovered the holotype. So that's quite cool. In terms of its description, like other ankylosaurs, they were a stocky herbivorous quadruped covered in lots of bony plates. And although its complete skeleton is not known, it was estimated to be about 4 meters long from snout to tip. And some estimates have put it at 6 meters long and about 350 kilograms. I think more recent ones actually make it a little bit smaller, but we'll get into that. Very little is known of the skull, but the parts are heavy ossified. And it actually has lots of teeth, which is the highest known of any Parankylosauria. So we'll get into how things like Stegoros and stuff and Antarctopelta. And these guys had much more 10 millimeters, but large teeth, but probably more teeth than larger relatives like Euoplocephalus in America. So it's quite cool. It has a postcranium, 5 cervical vertebrae found in this in the field. Which is interesting as well, and they had syndrome height length to light ratio is only 5.7, so they were very flat-bodied animals, and more similar to things like Stegoros, which has kind of led us to believe it's reconstructed very much like Stegoros, but other things like that's really cool. So, and we know it's an ankylosaur, and it was originally just considered, an ankylosaur, a basal-most notosaurid, but in 2021 there was a big study that came out with the description of Stegosaurus, Stegoros, which was a really cool little species of ankylosaur that came from Chile. I'm surprised we don't actually have it in the game yet. That would be another cool species there. I believe, no, we have had a Stegoros before. I've covered this before. There is one. Sorry, my mind blanked, but we definitely have a Stegoros. But that was definitely a cool species that was described. And with that group, with that description, there became a new group, Parankylosauria, which is a really, really ancient group of ankylosaurs, which included Cumbarasaurus, Stegoros, and Antarctopelta. And they also added Pagonopelta as a paranankylosaur, so there's about 4 different genera in there. And the other ones are eurankylosaurs that include like noasaurs and ankylosaurs and things like that. But really cool. So it seems like based on phylogenetic bracketing, it probably would have looked like Stegoros. Maybe not with the tail club like this. Stegoros has very much a interesting tail with lots of osteoderms. This is more kind of your traditional reconstruction, although I guess other than the tail, could be pretty spot on. Again, we don't have too much, but it seems like it would have been a lot like Stegoros in a lot of its proportions. In terms of histology, we know that the individual, early work suggested it was a juvenile, but bone histology in 2019 definitely did suggest the animal was sexually mature, so it would have been having babies or would have been close to being an adult size. So it's quite cool as well. And in terms of paleoecology, it did live in as I mentioned, the Gamma member of the Snowy Hill Formation, which is one of only 2 major dinosaur-bearing rocks found in Antarctica. And it actually would have been, its floral composition, habitat, and climate was similar to modern volcanic arches. But at the time it lived, it would have been much warmer and more humid, a result of being Antarctica without ice. It would have dense conifer forests, cycads, and ginkgos, and they still would have had to experience those long periods of darkness because they're at the bottom of the world, but there would have been a lot warmer for them as well. And it lived with quite a few interesting animals. The Gamma member is a marine sediment, so it's likely that obviously this animal wasn't marine, so likely it would have died and then been carried on the river or from the beaches and out into water, because these guys often will, it happens with a lot of space ones, they kind of blow up and because they're gassy, they tend to float on the water and then something punches them and then they fall to the bottom of the ocean and preserve. So there is also some evidence of them living in things like peat bogs and lots of club mosses, things like that. We also have some remains of other dinosaurs that lived with Dinosauria, which was an ornithopod and a potential sauropod, and some other animals such as an elasmosaurid, a mosasaur, a tylosaur called Tunifasaurus, also found in New Zealand, and a Noesaurus, and also fish like Encodus, Spicothus, and Notelodon, and things like ammonites. So it was a very rich formation filled with lots of different animals. So yeah, really, really cool. So we'll let you run off and do your thing, of course. Make sure that you don't get in the way of our next animal, because they tend to like to do that. And I should probably turn off my park, close that, because I hate getting all those messages. I hope in Jurassic World Evolution 3, I actually hope they get rid of this, because I just want my park to be closed. You can see them do their little animation. Very, very cute. Alright, very, very cute. Now get out of there. He's a really cool mod. I'm definitely a big fan. All right, next up, we're still in Antarctica, but we're going back in time. We're going to the early Jurassic, so a time that's very, very interesting. We've got Glacialisaurus. Let's have a look at this Glacialisaurus. Ooh. Which one should we look at? Let's have a look at you. I like the colours on you. I like the cut of your jib. Why not? So this is Glacialisaurus, which is a genus of sauropodomorphs. They used to be called prosauropods, but they're now sauropodomorphs. From the early Jurassic of Antarctica, and is known from 2 specimens, the holotype and a partial tarsus and metatarsus, and then another couple specimens as well. So the fossils were collected by a team led by paleontologist W.R. Hammer during a 1990 and 1901 field expedition in the central region of the Trans-Antarctic Mountains. And they come from sedimentary rocks from the Hansen Formation that dates back to the Persiabacan stage of the early Jurassic between 186 to 182 million years ago. And these fossils were described in 2007 and made the genus of the name Glacialisaurus hanneri, which means icy or frozen lizard, and then the specific name is to honor Hanneri, who led those expeditions. So yeah, I've kind of mentioned that as well in there. There has been several other fossils found in that site of dinosaurs such as Cryolophosaurus, the large tooth of a trilodont, and pterosaur humerus. So it is quite a phosphorus formation. So lots of fossils there. In terms of description, while few remains unknown, it seems to be quite robust for most basal or primitive sauropodomorphs. I don't like using the word primitive because it's not true, it's just basal. The femur fragment of is the larger of the 2 known specimens, measuring about 300 millimeters or just under a foot long, with an estimated full length of about 600 millimeters or 2 feet long. Glacialisaurus is estimated to be about 6.2 meters or 20 feet long, and as a basal sauropodomorph, it likely would have a long neck with a short head, small head with a leaf-shaped teeth, and its hands would have been short, wide, and robust with a large claw. So you can see it's starting to become a bit more sauropod-like, but they're still, walking around on 2 legs and things like that. So as I mentioned, those leg bones are quite big as well. In terms of classification, we don't know exactly where it goes, but it's believed to live in the family Massaspondilidae. So Massaspondilids were a group of non-Eurosauropod sauropodomorphs, so one of those really early, sauropodomorphs that we keep talking about. They existed from the late Jurassic, but to the early Jurassic of Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Antarctica. These guys. And Massaspondilids have been recovered as sister group or closely related to more derived sauropods. So this is a relative, more closely related to kind of later sauropods, like Diplodocus, Sargentinosaurus, Brachiosaurus, than some of the other sauropodomorphs. And in a 2007 phylogeny, they found, it was closely related to other things like Lythronax and Coloradosaurus. But most recent, they kind of it was related to things like Rhoetosaurus and Coloradosaurus. So that kind of interesting group of Massaspondilids, which is quite cool. So in terms of paleoenvironment, as I mentioned, it's from the Hansen Formation, which is the only other formation which has a lot of Antarctic dinosaurs. Okay, so found in Antarctica. So the specimen was discovered in tuferous siltstone, deposited in the Silurian and Pleistocene stage of Jurassic, so between 194 to 188 million years ago. And this geological formation is part of the Victoria Group and the Trans-Antarctic Mountains, which is approximately 400 meters in, or about 1,300 feet. The high altitude of this supports the idea of early, these guys had quite diverse forests. And this would have been, the Hansen Formation was actually deposited when it was quite active volcanoes, when it was kind of the supercontinent Gondwana was breaking up. And models of Jurassic airflow suggest that the coastal areas around this Antarctica probably never dropped below freezing, even though there was some slightly more extreme conditions inland. But there wouldn't have been very much, ice and things like that. Though they would have had to deal again with the the long nights and the long summers, long days in the summer, things like that. But it is known, we have a few things known from this era. We have Cryolophosaurus, a crow-sized dimorphodontid, a pterosaur, a rat-sized trilobdont synapsid, and 2 other smaller unnamed sauropodomorphs. And many plant genera are actually quite similar to the forests, similar to open woodlands of the North Island, New Zealand. So a lot of species that would have relatives where near I live. So that's quite cool to know that I live in basically, early Jurassic Antarctica, which is quite cool. And lots of really cool species of ferns and things like that. So yeah, another really cool species there. So we're going to have a look at another sauropod now. So this one's also done by Sweetener, as I mentioned before. So Sweetener gone up and do a thing. So now Sweetener, he has made 3. So 1, 2, 3. This is the last one he made for the defunct, Down Under Pact. So this is a really cool one. I actually saw the holotype of this one, so I'm really excited to have a good look at this one. So this is Rhoetosaurus. You can see a good look there. Takes them a while to come out of there, especially with those long tails. But look how amazing these guys look. I'll just let them walk over the cactuses so we can get a good look at their feet. And you can see they've actually got the correct feet. If you see that, look at that. Correct feet, even though they've still got a texture for the toes, it's correct feet. Yeah, amazing. So let's have a look at the Rhoetosaurus, a cool species that we get to talk about. So Rhoetosaurus, which means a Rhoetus lizard, is named after Rhoetus, which is a titan in Greek mythology. These guys are a genus of sauropod dinosaur from the Jurassic, about the Oxfordian. It's about 160 million years ago. Wallencole measures from what is now Eastern Australia. And it was estimated to be about 15 meters long and weigh 49 feet long and weigh about 9 tons. And some misspell it, but it's spelled R-H-O-E. Rhoetosaurus, so that's how it's spelled. So in 1924, Herbert Longman, who was a self-trained paleontologist and actually later became the director of the Queensland Museum of Brisbane, learned of a large fossil reptile skeleton that was exposed in the Wollong coal mine in Durham Downs near Roma in South Inland, Queensland. The station manager, Arthur Brownie, forwarded the fragments to bones of bone to Longman, who is honoured in the name Brownie. So Brownie is a scientific, the species-specific name, and is to honour him. The initial kind of collection was of 22 tail vertebrae and included a series of 16 consecutive bones and other fragmentary hind limb pieces. Soon after Longman announced that he discovered it, he visited the station and took the specimen and then found a lot more. He actually found quite a complete leg and bones and things like that. So it is quite well known, which is really cool. And has actually become one of the best known sauropods thus far found in Australia, as well as the Jurassic of Gondwana. So it's quite an important species as well. And what's interesting as well, when they first found it, they thought it potentially could have been an escaped elephant. There was like a lot of people just like, there's nothing like this in Australia now. And the truth is that it was a dinosaur fossil. So that's quite cool. And in terms of its relationship, it was first thought to be a cetosaurid. So that's kind of a group of sauropods like Cetosaurus. But now it's considered to be more closely related to Shringasaurus based on similar age and traits in the hilums, though it is now found as a basal sauropod just outside of Sauropoda. So it's not really related to later sauropods like the Diplodocids and Rebbachosaurids and Titanosaurs and Macrodarians like Brachiosaurus. It's now considered to be just outside, so it's like just about on the way there as well. But the author noted that position is weak and a placement in Sauropodia cannot be rejected. So it's very possible that it could be, an animal that is a neosauropod. So definitely not a member of the neosauropod but its position is a little bit funky. But yeah, really, really cool. Awesome animal. So let's let it run off and do your thing. So this next one, so those last three were all done by Sweetener. We've got Shringasaurus, which is not a dinosaur. This is from the Jurassic, and I know you're there. I'm not going to let you bunk up my video because I don't want them to watch the release. But yeah, these guys are not a dinosaur, but these guys are made by chocolate. So let's have a look at Shringasaurus. So here we are, Shringasaurus. So really, really cool animal. So I actually love the patterns for this guy, and I'm glad I get to talk about it because these are one of those weird Jurassic animals that doesn't get that much love. So I'm excited to give them a bit of love. So let's have a look at Shringasaurus. So Shringasaurus means horned lizard, so it comes from the Indian language Sanskrit and ancient Greek for lizard. So these guys are an extinct genus of Archosauromorph, so they are related to crocodiles and dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Reptile from the Middle Jurassic of India, and is only known from the type and only species Shringasaurus indicus, and they are named from the Dewa Formation in the state of Madhya Pradesh, and this is an animal called an Alocotosaur, which is a really interesting genus or family of unusual herbivorous reptiles from the Jurassic, and is more closely related to the smaller and better known animal Enzedodontosaurus from the family Enzedodontidae. But what makes this guy really interesting and distinct, like some ceratopsians, they do have two large horns over their eyes and over their skull, and also have a long neck like a sauropod, and shape of its teeth as well. So they seem to be a large browsing herbivore before sauropods became a thing. So it's kind of evidence a lot of people, realize in the Jurassic that a lot of early Jurassic weird animals were doing a lot of things before the dinosaurs did them. The dinosaurs just did it bigger and better. So you can see it's got the horns of a ceratopsian, the long neck of a sauropod. So definitely a very interesting animal to look at. So they are very large body quadrupedal animals. They reach about 3 to 4 meters long. And it seems to closely resemble a Zenodontosaurus, but except had those kind of horns. Though being larger, it's more recognizable because of its long, curvy horns, but also shorter and thicker neck, and also had much longer spines. And while this skull is not completely known, we'll have a look at the skull there. What's preserves indicate that the snout was actually small and boxy, with a short, deep snout and rounded jaws and bony nostrils. So very boxy body, or boxy head. And the horns seem to resemble those of ceratopsian dinosaurs, even though they become totally, they are totally unrelated to each other. So these horns are added to the frontal bones on the roof of the skull over the eyes and sit the entire breadth of the skull, and is pointed up and it kind of curves forward. And it seems that smaller and younger individuals would add smaller, more gracile horns, and that indicate that they do not fully develop them until they're mature. Though there is one specimen that lacks horns entirely, but we don't know whether it is potentially small, and where there's another similar small-sized specimen has small but well-developed horns. So its potential, maybe it could be sexual dimorphism, and maybe one sex, most likely the females, didn't have these horns and the males did. So we just don't have enough of a good sample size to figure that out. So the horns themselves are rough, grooved textures, and they had a keratin sheath in life, very much like ceratopsian dinosaurs, and also, mammals today as well. And likely would have been a lot longer than the bone cores. And the bones of the skull and the horns were usually long, and larger individuals kind of had bones of the roof of the skull kind of put together. And they have teeth that are very similar to Enzedodontosaurus, which is, very big round teeth, and which is used, eating plants, like a lot of these reptiles. So in terms of its skeleton, it does have some things that look quite similar to those in sauropods. It has well-defined laminae and biodie fossa in some of these vertebrae, which is actually quite similar to sauropods. And some other really interesting little adaptations that are kind of seen in, foot's very typical of an early Archosauromorph. So almost like very crocodile-like in that regard, which is quite fun. As I mentioned, it was found in a single bone bed in the Upper Dua Formation, in the Subcontinental Basin, in the Hoshkabad district in the state of Madhya Pradesh. It's found to be Middle Jurassic, so quite old. Jurassic is a very weird time. I think a lot of people very much underrate the Jurassic because it had a lot of very interesting animals that before the dinosaurs really took over. Like there were dinosaurs in the Jurassic, but there were lots of really weird animals as well. But yeah, in terms of its classification, it is in the family Azenodontidae, which is Sauridae, which is closely related to Anasaurus itself. Though the family is typically grouped within the recently recognized clade Echolodontosaur, Zongotrolophosaurids, which is another really interesting group of Jurassic weirdos. But they're closely they're Archosauromorphs, but they're not that closely related to Archosauriforms, which includes dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and birds. They're more closely related to, things like Rhoetosaurus as well. But yeah, really, really interesting. So they seem to... The bone bed that was found actually suggests, because they did live in a bone bed, that they were a gregarious animal and may have lived in herds, and the herd that way have died in the bone bed due to a mass mortality event and were buried in a short period of time. And the bone bed has both juveniles, subadults, and adults, suggest they would have lived in mixed herds. Very much potentially similar to modern, herbivorous mammals, which is interesting as well. In terms of the function of the horns, it's likely they would have been for sexual selection, as we mentioned, they have been sexual dimorphic. And, adults had larger horns than younger animals, so it seems this could have been a way for, fighting each other and things like that, which is interesting. More similar to modern horned bovids. And there actually is one specimen that has a pair of malformed vertebrae that has a type of arthritis. So it's which is interesting as well. And in terms of where it lives in the Upper Dua Formation, there's a very rich formation with lots of different types of Dicynodonts, Tendospondylus or large amphibians, lungfish, all sorts of other weird little animals like that. And in terms of its habitat, it seemed to live in a dry, semi-arid floodplain and would have kind of had to deal with droughts occasionally. But luckily, they probably would have, as I mentioned, there are some adaptations like large body size and teeth are very similar to sauropods, which suggests it would have been a large, high-browsing animal in its environment, like the equivalent of a giraffe or an elephant in the Middle Jurassic in that regard. But yeah, not too big, about 4 meters long. Still a big animal, though. I wouldn't want to mess with it. Another really cool species that we get to talk about, and Chocolate, always does a wonderful job. So we can let them run off and do their thing. Now we've done all these guys, we've done the land animals. Next up, we've got some aquatic animals. I love talking about aquatic species. So next up, we have got, this one's done by Pizza Otter, we have got Tiktaalik. Here is Tiktaalik. Let it have a swim so we get to talk about some cool specimens, and then they all panic for some reason. What's to do? We'll have a look anyway. So look at you. I'll have a look at you. You look fun. I like you. I like the cut of your jib, mate. So anyway, this is Tiktaalik. So Tiktaalik, which is Inuit, which is a monospecific genus of extinct Synskroptrion, which is a lobe-finned fish that comes from the late Devonian, so about 375 million years ago, and has a lot of features that are akin to modern tetrapods or fallen animals. That includes, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, all them things. And is estimated to have a total length between 1.2 to 2.7 meters, or between 4 feet to 9 feet long, on the basis of various specimens. So in terms of discovery, it was first discovered in 2004 from the Fram Formation on Ellesmere Island in northern Canada. And its age is, as I mentioned, estimated between 375 to 383 million years ago, so quite a big time. And at the time, it would have been part of a continent named Lythronax, which would have been modern eastern North America and Greenland, and would have been centered around the equator, and would have been quite a warm climate. So that's interesting as well. So Tiktaalik comes from the Inuit word for large freshwater fish, and the fishapod genus received its name to suggest Inuit elders where the fossil was discovered. The specific name Rosie A was actually honours an anonymous donor that kind of helped with the specimen, sort of fun digging up at the specimen. And it has been an animal that has taken a detailed look and has been an important animal that has looked at evolution of tetrapods and things like that. And there's now more than 60 specimens known, though the holotype remains the most complete and well-described fossil. So we do have a pretty good idea of what Tiktaalik is like. Tiktaalik provides insight on the features of the extinct closest relatives of tetrapods, so it isn't quite... we didn't descend from Tiktaalik, but we probably descended from one of Tiktaalik's relatives. So it was a large fish. The largest known fossils are estimated to be about 9 feet long, and the longest lower jaws is about a foot long. So they had like a long, flat head that was actually quite similar in shape to a crocodile than most fish. And they had lots of optic notches, and they also had spiracles, which suggested the creature would have actually had primitive lungs. It actually seems to lack the characteristic most fish have, bony plates in the gill area that restrict head movements. So these guys would have been the earliest known fish to have a neck, so they were able to move their head, especially when they were on land and in the shallows. Another really interesting thing about them, of course, is their forelimbs. So the fins of Tiktaalik kind of help us figure out how the weight-bearing digit evolved. And the fins are both robust internal skeleton, like tetrapods, and surrounded by a kind of web of bony ray fins, like fish. So it's kind of like an in-between, or it's called Leptotricula. So these Leptotricula was thickest and most extensive on the front end, and then they're leaving more room for muscle, and then they have the scapula to coracoid, so a little bit more muscle as well. So looking at these kind of species as well, one of the present questions is how that evolved and kind of how it went from the lobe-fin fish, things like coelacanths and lungfish, how it kind of went from that into the leg or arm of, a human. So this is kind of an in-between there, and it's starting to lean a little bit more on the side of becoming a limb, so there's bigger muscles, and the radius and ulna and things like that are all becoming much larger to support their weight, so that's quite cool. And there's a lot more information. I could go into the anatomy and things like that, but I'm going to keep it a little bit, because this is a YouTube video, I don't want to make it too long. We're going to keep it a little bit more brief. But there's a lot of adaptations that are becoming something that can bear its weight on land and move around on land efficiently. And while other regions, like the pelvis was actually intermediate in form between earlier lobe-fin fishes and later tetrapods. Its pelvis was much larger than other fish, nearly the same size as shoulder girdle, like in tetrapods. In terms of shape, it's a simple bone, but much more similar to a fish. So it's, as I mentioned, you can see it's got traits. Like the size of it's more like a tetrapod, but its anatomy is more like a fish. So it's kind of becoming, kind of that midway, so which kind of shows us how these parts evolved as well. So I think that's quite cool. In terms of the torso, it is quite elongated by the standards of most Devonian tetrapodomorphs. And even though these vertebrae were not ossified, there are 45 pairs of them between the skull and the rib and the hip region, so quite long. And incubating ribs are also known in Ichthyostega, which are a little bit more kind of later on the tetrapod tree, a little bit more of a land living animal. It also likely lacked dorsal fins, and the shape of the caudal and tail are unknown, but it seems they would have had a simple anal fin on the other side of the tail, and something a bit more basic, very much similar to modern lobe-fin fishes. And they also are covered in diamond-shaped bony scales, similar to Pandaichthys, which is among lobe-fin fishes. And strong lugs are suggested by the existence of a spiracle, so that means they would have potentially a more robust rib cage, which was a key trait, to evolve to living on land, because can't use gills on land, you've got to use lungs, so that's why you develop lungs. And they are sometimes compared to things like gars, especially alligator gars, because they have a lot of similar characteristics. But these guys probably would have been a little bit more adept, coming onto land. And they're the only species in their genus, and they kind of represent a transitional between a non-tetrapod vertebrate fish, such as Pandaichthys, and things such as early tetrapods, such as Ichthyostega and Archaeostega. So it's technically called a fishapod, so that's kind of what they call it. And it's like a transitional fossil, so it's like, it is the tetrapods what Archaeopteryx is to birds, Troodons, and Dromaeosaurs. So it's kind of like that in between, or like things like Pachycetus is to modern whales, so those kind of things. It is a transitional species, or even better one, Basilosaurus or Ambulocetus is probably a better example. But yeah, it has quite a bit of an extensive history to it. There's been doubts whether it was considered, original ancestor of us, but 2010 there has been some doubts whether it was actually related to us in terms of maybe like a convergent evolution, evolve these traits convergently and within these groups. So it is kind of confusing where it is whether it's considered one of our ancestors, because we do have specimens that look very similar to Tiktaalik that are tetrapods but are older than Tiktaalik. So we're kind of like, so is this just the basal anatomy? Is this convergent evolution? So it may not be our direct relative, but it's definitely still important on how how that transition from water to land kind of evolved. So I think it's still quite important there. In terms of its paleobiology, they generally have characteristics of low-fin fish, but their front fins have arm-like skeletal structures, more akin to those of crocodile, and have a shoulder, elbow, and wrist. As well, it's kind of very similar to, it's got a neck, but unlike most fishes, it has a skull more similar to a crocodile, and it likely would have, gone around on its, flexed its protolimbs on the floors of streams and pulled itself onto shore for brief periods. That's believed to what's kind of done. And the fossils of Tiktaalik have been found in the Fram Formation, which were lots of streams. So this was probably a benthic animal that lived on the bottom of shallow waters and even out of the water for short periods, with a skeleton indicating it could support its body under the force of gravity. Whether it was very shallow on land, so they probably spent a little bit of time on land, which is quite cool, and has very much been parts of internet memes, saying that Tiktaalik, a lot of memes is like, got to fix the prop, kill Tiktaalik so it didn't evolve, even though it may not be one of our direct ancestors. But yeah, I think that's quite funny. But yeah, and that's a really, really cool guy, and I really do love this mod. Pete's Otter always doing a good job, and a really nice little model of Tiktaalik. Really gives it a good look at it, and as mentioned, 9 meters long, so that this is on par with probably some of the biggest specimens. Looks pretty amazing, 10 out of 10, and you can see that crocodile-like head looking out there. See, you can see it's kind of like an in-between between a fish and a crocodile. Yeah, really, really awesome. So we're going to let them swim off and do their thing. So next up, last but certainly not least, for our kind of marine animals today. So we've got an animal that actually only went extinct in the last couple hundred years. We have got the Steller sea cow, done by Viral Cyclops and Game Videos for Life. I'm actually going to look at the other one because the other one's got better colours and more accurate colours, because we actually described this species first as it was alive. So let's see if we'll have a look at you. Let's see if you're working. I'll have to wait until you get out of there. Get in the sun, mate. Come on. Why are you hanging around the corner there? There we are. Oh, it's doing its social. Beautiful animals, though. Oh, carry on. Carry on, carry on. Now they're swimming inside each other. Let's see if we can keep going. I want to see you swimming in the water then. They never like to play ball when it's a video, don't they? They seem to like to mess around. And there's actually perfect habitat since they were aquatic herbivores. There we are. There's a beautiful look at our... Here we are. So this is the Steller sea cow. So the Steller sea cow, Hydrodamus gigas. These guys are an extinct Sirenian, so they are a species of dugong or manatee, so they are related to them. Described by Georg Wilhelm Steller in 1741. So it is originally described as a living animal, which is fun. So at the time, it was only found around the Commander Islands in the Bering Sea between Alaska and Russia, but historically, in the Pleistocene, it ranged across the North Pacific and likely contracted to such extreme a degree due to the glacial cycles, and it's possible that indigenous populations interacted with them before the Europeans did. So it was first encountered on the Vista Spearing's Great Northern Expedition, where the crew became shipwrecked there, and much of what it is known about the species comes from direct observations by Steller, who wrote it in the book of The Beast of the Sea. And within 27 years, it was actually hunted to extinction because of its meat, fat, and hide. So it didn't last very long in terms of human science, so that's very, very sad. But as I mentioned, description, it would have reported to grow up to about 8 to 9 meters long. So as adults, so 26 to 30 feet long, so larger than extant sirenians, much larger, and there may potentially be specimens longer than that. So in the same size ranges like minke whales and large male orcas, so quite a big beast. In 1987, there was a rather complete skeleton found on Bering Island, about 3 meters long, and then 2017 another one was found at about 5.2, and another one in life about 6 meters as well. And Greg Steller's writings has two estimates between 4 and 24 tons, but true estimates kind of suggested that it fall between 8 to 10 tons, so still quite large. And the size makes the sea cows one of the largest mammals in the Holocene, alongside baleen whales and some species of toothed whale. And the reason it probably got so big was because it lived in cooler climates, so having that bigger size reduces their surface area to volume, which allows them to better retain heat. Unlike other sirenians, it was positively buoyant and potentially unable to completely submerged. It had a very thick outer skin that was about an inch thick to prevent injury from sharp rocks or ice, or prevent submerged skins from drying out. The sea cow's blubber was about 8 to 10 centimeters, or about 3 to 4 inches thick, which was another adaptation to deal with the freezing Bering waters of the North Pacific. Its skin was brownish black with white patches in some individuals, so that's why I kind of picked this one. It's smooth along its back and rough on its sides, with crater-like depressions mostly caused by parasites. And this rough texture led to the animal being nicknamed the bark animal. And hair on the body was sparse, but inside of the sea cow's flippers were covered in bristles, and the forelimbs were roughly about 67 centimeters, 26 inches long, and it had a forked tail more similar to a dugong. So in terms of its head, it had a head that was small and short compared to the body, but the animal's upper lip was large and broad, extending far beyond the lower jaw than the mouth to be located in the skull. And unlike other sirenians, it was toothless and had a dense array of interlocking white bristles on its upper lip. And these bristles were about 3.8 centimeters, or about an inch and a half long, and they were used to tear seaweed stalks and hold food. And the sea cow had two keratinous plates called ceratodonts, located on its palate and mandible that it used for chewing. And according to Steller, these plates or masticary pads were held together by an interdental papillae as part of the gums, and in many small holes that contained nerves and arteries. Like all sirenians, it had a snout that pointed downwards that allowed it to better grasp kelp, and its nostrils were about 5 centimeters or 2 inches wide, and it had stiff bristles along its mouth that are about 10 to 12 centimeters from its muzzle. It also had small eyes located halfway between its nostrils and ears with black kind of iris and things like that. And it had no other eyelashes, but like other diving creatures such as sea otters, it actually had a nictitating membrane to help prevent its injuries to its eyes. So it was believed to have had about 7 cervical vertebrae, like most mammals, 17 thoracic, 3 lumbar, and 34 caudal vertebrae, and quite large ribs. And like all sirenians, its scapula was kind of fan-shaped, being larger on the posterior side and then narrower towards the neck, which is quite interesting as well, being quite big and bulky. And in all selected specimens, the manus is missing, since Dinosaur or the sister taxon of Hamadryas, so it's one of its relatives, had reduced phalanges. It's actually believed that these guys didn't have hands at all. The sea cow's heart was about 16 kilograms, about 35 pounds, and its stomach measured about 1.8 meters long and about 1.5 meters wide, so 6 foot by 5 foot. And its full length of the intestinal tract was about 500 feet long and about 151 meters, being about 20 times the length of the animal's length. It also had no gallbladder, but had a wide common bile duct. It had a 10 centimeter wide anus, with feces resembling those of horses. And we're not going to talk about that. And then Genetic evidence indicates convergent evolution with other marine mammals in genes related to metabolic and immune function, including leptin associated with energy homeostasis and reproductive regulations. That's probably got to do with, living in cooler climates like, whales and things, even though they're more closely related to elephants and Tenrex than they are to whales. So while Steller did not have any natural predators, we believe it could have been hunted potentially by killer whales or sharks, but its buoyancy would have made them difficult to hunt because they couldn't be hard to drown them, and their habitats that they lived in probably got rid of sharks. And they tend to live in herds as well. They did have an endoparasite that was quite similar to whale louse, but that potentially, with the host extinction, that went extinct as well, so it's a little bit sad. Like other sirenians, they were obligate herbivores and spent most of the day feeding and only lifting their head every 4 to 5 minutes for breathing. And kelp was their main food source, so it made an algivore. They fed on several species of kelp, and they really only ate the what's up? I think I'm getting messages anyway. But anyway, Steller sea cow only directly fed on the soft parts of the kelp, which caused this tougher stem and hold fast to wash up in the shoreline in heaps. They may have also fed on seagrasses, but they were not common enough to become a supportive wild population and could not be their primary food source. So they were feeding on kelp and probably seagrass. And kelp also releases, since they floated, they likely fed on the canopy kelp, and is believed to have access to kelp no deeper than a meter. And kelp also releases a chemical deterrent to protect it from grazing, but the canopy kelp releases lower concentration of this chemical, so the sea cow can graze safely. And also noted they grew thin during the frigid winters, including a period of fasting. But fossils as well from the Pleistocene Aleutian Islands were larger than the ones found on the Commander Islands. So because maybe it may not have been preferred habitat, they may have actually gotten smaller than and not been able to deal with it quite as well. They would have been smaller compared to the giants that were probably like 9 or 10 meters long that lived on the Aleutian Islands. In terms of its behavior, Steller described the sea cow as being quite social, and it lived in small family groups and helped injured members, and it was apparently monogamous. Steller sea cow may have also, exhibited parental care, and the young were kept at the front of the herd to protect them against predators. Steller actually recorded that a female was caught. A group of other sea cows attacked the hunting boat by ramming it and rocking it, and after the hunt, the male actually followed the boat to shore, and even after the captured animal had died. So there's actually, if you go on to read the actual book, I've read the book of the season of Beasts of the Sea, and when he talks about it, it's a very riveting, sad thing. They were very much potentially monogamous, and they were ramming the boat and defended his mate as well. So it's a really beautiful kind of sad that we lost these beautiful animals. Mating season occurred in early spring, and gestation took a little over a year, with calves likely delivered in autumn. And they seem to have greater number of calves in autumn to other times of year based on Steller's observations. And since females only have one set of mammary glands, they likely only had one calf at the time. So the Steller sea cow used its forelimbs for swimming, feeding, walking in shallow water, and defending itself, and also holding onto its partner during copulation. And its forelimbs were also used to anchor the sea cow down to prevent it being swept away by strong new shore waves as well. But due to the large size, along with other marine megafauna in the region, may have been prey for transient orcas, and it is likely that they experienced predation. As they observed them, calves would keep to themselves and to the shore, and the orcas would be the most likely candidates for these hunting them. In addition, early indigenous peoples may have actually hunted them and killed them for food. It's possible that may be one of the reasons they were not found in a lot of areas, because of ancient hunters extirpating them from a lot of areas. And Steller sea cows may have had a mutualistic relationship with local seabirds, where they would have come on its back and eaten a lot of kind of parasites and things like that, very similar to oxpeckers and modern African megafauna. So that's quite cool. So let me just quickly respond to this message. Steller sea cow was a member of the genus Hydrodamulus, which is a group of large sirens whose sister taxon was Dinosaur. And actually, its ancestors would have lived in tropical mangroves before it evolved to live in the North Pacific. These guys in Dinosaur would have been part of the family Hydromelidae, which diverged about 4 to 8 million years ago from other Sirenians, and its closest living relative would have been the dugong. And there is a couple other sea cows. There is the Crusoe, which is the original ancestor of the Steller sea cow. There's also the Tiktaalik sea cow, which is thought to be just lumped into the Steller sea cow as well. They may be their own species, but sometimes they just lump them in. There's a couple different species. In terms of research history, as I mentioned, the Steller sea cow was first discovered by Greg Wyndham Steller and was named after him. And he researched the wildlife of Bering Island when he was shipwrecked there for about a year. And the island included populations of sea cows, sea otters, sea lions, Steller sea lions, and northern fur seals. And he managed to describe them in detail, so give them something to do. And said, for decades after discovery, no skeletal remains have been known, and this may have been due to rising and falling sea levels. And the first bones were unearthed in 1840 after 7 years. So likely, so that's interesting, after 70 years it was thought to be extinct. The first skeleton was found in 1844 and sent to Pittsburgh, and then a lot of fossils had been seen since. And there had been some illustrations. There's the Palace picture is the only known drawing that's come from a complete specimen. But yeah, there's other people trying to draw them. In terms of their range, the Steller sea cow at the time of discovery was thought to be restricted just to the Commander Islands, which is just off the coast of Russia. The first fossils outside of the Commander Islands was found in the interglacial places of Antarctopelta, I believe you say that, and actually found some from the late Pleistocene would have been found in Monterey Bay, California, and also Honshu, Japan, so they did probably have quite a wide range, and that's probably where they restricted up to. This suggests the sea cows did have a far more extensive range in prehistoric times, and it's possible, and there's even some from Japan, found there. And genetic evidence also suggests, because as I mentioned, recent enough to look at these evidences of genetics, it seems they suffered a population bottleneck about 400,000 years ago. So whatever thing happened 400 years ago could have impacted their population. And would have been abundant, pretty much all around the North Pacific, from Japan to California. So that's quite interesting. Bone fragments have actually been found by the native Inuit people that historically they would have lived in their islands. And there are some, there's a sea cow ribbon discovered in 1998 on Kesha Island that was dated to be about 1,000 years old. And there is some that are dated to more Ashluan Islands and St. Lawrence as well. So they would have been within the last couple thousand years. So it would have been kind of a slow decline. And this would have probably been a relic. The Commander Islands would have been a relic population. And sadly, may have been on the way to going extinct anyway, even if we didn't give them that push, which is sad to think about. But I love to imagine. I'd like to imagine what we could have done if we conserved them and took care, helped the species, kind of repropagate, and that would have been quite cool. But genetic evidence suggests that the Steller sea cow were the last of a much more ubiquitous population of sea cows. They had the same genetic diversity as the woolly mammoths of Wrangel Island, so they were an isolated population that had kind of just been hanging on due to habitat regression and things like that. And by the time sea level stabilized about 5,000 years ago, the population would have plummeted. So these guys would have potentially been a dead clade walking. So these guys would have most part went extinct, and only tiny populations did live. But the presence of Steller sea cows in the Aleutian Islands may have caused the Aleutian Islands to migrate westward to hunt them and cause the extirpation in the area. And one factor potentially could have been, local peoples that hunted the sea cows, and other cultures that depended heavily on marine mammals that would have caused their extinction. At the onset of the medieval warm period, which reduced the ability to count, may have caused some local extinctions. And another thing as well, the decline of otter populations because of hunting may have actually caused the sea urchin population to go up, which means less kelp, which means less sea cows. So that's probably could have helped them as well. And when Europeans discovered them, there was likely only about 2,000 of them left, which is still, a decent-sized population. They could have, if good conservation efforts could have really worked with that, but sadly, we weren't kind of there yet. And the small population was actually quite quickly wiped out by fur traders, seal hunters, and others who kind of followed the Vitus Bering's route through the habitat of Alaska. It was hunted for its fat, and it kind of went extinct. It went extinct exactly. It was first discovered 27 years after it was discovered in 1768, it was declared extinct, which is quite sad. And the first attempts to hunt it was actually unsuccessful due to its strength and thick hide. So we think the first time they tried to hunt one, they couldn't do it because it was too strong and too thick, and they could not pierce its skin. They tried again a month later with a harpooner spearing the animal, and they tried to stab it with the bayonets. So they did try, it put up a good fight, so that's good. But the impacts of extinction, it was considered a keystone species, so it was quite important for the dispersal and recruitment of kelp and help with the flow of nutrients, because like big herbivores in terrestrial ecosystems, these guys would have, eaten plants, pooped them out, become fertilizer, and kind of helped those ecosystems as well, and may have helped with the dispersal of kelp. And their presence have actually allowed sea otters and large marine invertebrates to coexist as well, so there's potentially a lot of things that could have been hurt there. And there's reportedly some later sightings, but we don't really know about those. And there is some kind of uses for them. So the original they were considered quite tasty, and it tasted similar to corned beef, even though it was tougher, redder, and needed to be cooked longer. So there was uses for them. The bones were also sold to museums. The chorotal bone was well suited for making knife handles and things like that. It was considered mermaid ivory. There's another thing as well. So people used to eat them and use their bones for knives and things. And it has been mentioned in literature, so that it was actually featured in The White Seal in the Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling, where a rare white seal actually consulted the sea cow during his journey to go home. Tales of Sea Cow was a docu-fiction series, so talking about, finding them. They also appeared in other books and other things like that. And there has been potential talk, genetic research into them and potential revival. So, in 2021, so the nuclear genome of these guys was actually sequenced from remains, and they showed that they were potentially already in decline due to low genetic diversity caused by climate change and hunting by Paleolithic people prior to the discovery of them by Steller. So suggests that's kind of similar to the woolly mammoths of Wrangel Island. A year later, though, in 2022, a group of Russian scientists began to research the possibility of potentially reviving the species and reintroducing it into the Bering Sea. Arctic Sirenia plans to revive this species through gene editing of the dugong, but an artificial worm would be necessary as there's no living animal that could be a successful surrogate for this species. And Ben Lamb of Colossal Biosciences, you love to hate them or hate to love them, they've also stated that he and his company want to revive the species after they complete their first project, like woolly mammoths, dodos, thylacines, and northern white rhinos, and have an artificial worm developed. So, we may be getting Steller sea cows back in the future, which would be quite cool. I kind of wish we conserved them in the first place, but yeah, beautiful species. I actually think that this deserves another good look, because look at these beautiful guys. Amazing. I love a Steller sea cow, one of my favorite animals, and I'm so happy to actually see it in the game and talk about it. So really, really beautiful job. Viral Cyclops, you've done amazing. Love to see some marine mammals, and a Steller sea cow deserves some love. One of my favorite mods, and great to put in a part 100, one of my favorite species. So yeah, really, really awesome. I'll actually take a screenshot of that. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So we'll let that screenshot happen. So we're going to carry on next. We've only got a couple more species left. Next up by Chocolate, we've got the Wawit Formation Pack. So we've got a couple animals that come from, you guess it, the Wawit Formation. I'll just text. Yeah, so really cool. We're going to have a look first, species Diabloceratops. We've got here really, really beautiful. This is based on the beasts of the Mesozoic, model. I've got that one. I love it. So this is Diabloceratops. I've already covered this guy a couple times. A lot of people like to make this species, so I think I'll just give it the quick once over. So Diabloceratops, which means devil horned face. These guys are an extinct genus of Centrosaurine ceratopsian that comes from about 81 to 84 million years. 81 million years ago, from the later part of the Cretaceous period, and is from Utah. It was a medium-sized, moderately built, ground-dwelling quadrupedal herbivore. Would have got to about 4.5 meters long and about a little over a ton. And at the time it was discovered, is actually the oldest known ceratopsian, or ceratopsid, and was first centrosaurine known from latitude south of Montana. And its generic name has been devil horned face, coming from Diablo, which means devil, Spanish for devil, and ceratops, which is green for horned face. The species name was specific name of owner Jeffrey Etten, so its last is Ettoni, who was a paleontologist from Weber State University and longtime friend of the lead author Jim Kirkland, who had a big role in establishing the Grand Staircase Escalate National Monument, and it was described in 2010. So the only specimen is from the Wahweap Formation. I already mentioned the Wahweap from Last Chance Creek, member in Kane County, Utah. It's dated to be between 81 to about 81 million years ago. And it contains a partial skull and a piece of the lower, jaw. Not too much about it. And it seems to be quite similar to Macroceratops, Uniceratops, and Menophyceratops. As I mentioned, not too big, medium-sized, 15 feet long, and about 1.3 tons. Built very much like a typical ceratopsian, though it had large neck frill made of bone. It had a small horn on the nose, and then two that kind of curled up the back, and then two large horns at the top of the frill, which kind of give it, those devil horns. So that's where it kind of got its name from. But yeah, it is considered quite basal in the Centrosaurine tree, so it's considered the most basal of them all, like Diabloceratops and Macroniceratops, which is literally just Diabloceratops, but the frill horns kind of curve down. Then it is closely related to things like the Pseudoceratopsinae as well. But in terms of habitat, the Wahweap Formation has been radiometrically dated. So if we're talking about the Wahweap, we'll talk about the Wahweap. About 82 to 77 million years old, and its precise age is about 81 million years ago, so this comes from a little bit older. During this time, it would have been the Western Terran Seaway was at its widest extent, almost completely isolating southern Laramidia from the rest of North America, and the areas would have been lakes, floodplains, and easy-flowing rivers, and they would have been part of the Grand Staircase region, which has an immense sequence of sedimentary rock, which is quite cool. And the presence of rapid sedimentation indicates this was a wet seasonal climate. So would have shared this climate with lots of other dinosaurs. Would have shared it with the Hadrosaur, Aphicurus gargarsoni, also Dilophosaurus hutchinae, unnamed ankylosaurs and pachycephalosaurs. Our animal next coming up, the theropod Lythronax, who was likely the apex predator. But other vertebrates from the Wahweap Formation include Diabloceratops. That include Diabloceratops include freshwater fish, bowfish, rays and sharks, turtles, crocodilians, and mammals, and other invertebrates, things like that. So, and lots of mammals, including placental mammals and multituberculates, something like that. So, a very rich formation, which is quite cool. So, yeah, that's Diabloceratops, and really, really cool guy there. So, let's him run off and do his thing. And then we'll talk about Chocolate's next one, Lythronax. So I think we've had a Lythronax in a while, so we'll have a talk about Lythronax. Why not? I think it deserves a good talk. So let's open up. So a rather beautiful mod. I do love the colours on this guy. Let's have a look. Which one should we pick? They're all the same. We'll have a look at you. You look in the most dynamic pose. We'll have a look at you. There we are. So Lythronax is a genus of Tyrannosaur dinosaur that lived in North America between about 81 million years ago. I'm not going to go 9.5. From the late Cretaceous, and his only known specimen comes from the Wahweap Formation, if you could guess it, in Utah from the Grand Staircase Escalate National Park Monument in 2009. It contains a partial skull and skeleton. So it became the basis of a new genus and species, Lythronax agetes, with the generic name meaning Gore King, and the specific name Arrogates comes from the Greek poet Homer's name for the winds of the southwest that refers to the specimen's geographic province of North America. So as I mentioned, it was found in the Grand Staircase by Scott Richardson in 2009, and they kind of did this expedition with the University of Utah and found that it belonged to a Tyrannosaur, a new species. And the specimen itself was made the holotype of the new genus by paleontologist Mark A. Lowen and colleagues in 2013. Already mentioned kind of the name. It is considered to be a king, because it's Lythronax, because it is related to T-Rex, and, that's kind of makes it cool, like to do whatever king. So the holotype and single known specimen consists of partial skull, including the right maxilla, both nasals, the right frontal, the left jugal, the left quadrate, the right lasospheroid, and other parts. I'm not going to go too much into them. The name, the paper Lythronax, is the author described the new specimen as being geographically or geologically younger than the Tyrannosaur tetraphonius, which is from the Comparowitz. The two tyrannosaurs are used to investigate the evolutionary and geographical origins of Tyrannosauridae, and they can refer to it as the great uncle of T-Rex, which is quite funny. Then in 2017, the US government announced to shrink the Grand Staircase and Bears Ears monuments for mining, but luckily it was one of the two dinosaurs that was used to protect it, along with the Diabloceratops, so they both actually protected the monument as well, so that's quite cool. So at the time when Lythronax was announced, it was estimated to be about 7.3 to 8 meters, and about 24 to 26 feet, and about 2.5 tons, based on comparisons with a much larger T-Rex. But more modern estimates make it a lot lower, so probably about 5 meters long, and about 500 kilograms, or just under half a ton. There was a relatively robust Tyrannosaurid, and like other members of its group, it had short forelimbs, with 2 fingers, large and strong high limbs, broad jaws, and very robustly constructed skull. And although earlier small-bodied members of the superfamily Tyrannosauria possessed protofeathers, the presence could be varied between the species or the age of individuals. So it may have had feathers, may not. This interpretation, as you can see, definitely has feathers, and I like it all the more for that. Relatively short skull, short snout, and broad skull, similar to other Tyrannosaurids as well, but you can see it's kind of becoming that as well, which is quite cool. In terms, even though its postcranial is poorly known, there's parts of the pubis known. There's a large pubic boot, very similar to other Tyrannosaurs, and it's more similar to those of Tarbosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, but dissimilar to those of like Albertosaurus and Tetraphonius as well. So it's got a lot of traits that are actually more similar to Tyrannosaurus and in things like Tetraphonius. That is quite interesting. So it is a Coelurosaur. Belongs to in the family Tyrannosauridae, with most Tyrannosaurid genera coming from North America and Asia. It is the oldest Tyrannosaurid known so far, though prior to its discovery, it was noted that holotype specialized distinct from Brachiosaurus and Tetraphonius, likewise from southern Utah. So there may have been at least 3 genera living in this age and time, so that's quite interesting of Tyrannosaurid. More detailed kind of looks at it to accompany them based on they suggested Lythronax was actually a cis taxon, with a group consisting of Maastrichtian taxon like Tarbosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, and Juicing Tyrannus. That was more closely related to other taxa, such as Diabloceratops and Tetraphonius, which were younger than Lythronax but older in the group. So it is kind of as I mentioned, the great uncle T-Rex. Looking at its relationships, the most recent kind of taxonomy, it is related to the Tyrannosauridae, so it is related to things like Diabloceratops and Tetraphonius and Anukosaurus, closer to them, even though it is a bit older, compared, and related to them. So that's kind of what it's suggested now. So they're kind of in that kind of Tyrannosaurian family clade. So after the Alliaramasaurs, Alliaramus kind of split, but before, you got T-Rex and Diabloceratops, it's kind of that in between. In terms of paleogeography, during the late Cretaceous, as I mentioned, the Western Interior Seaway would have divided North America at that time. And as I mentioned, Lythronax is quite old, but as I mentioned, is closely related to the Diabloceratops and things like that. So just because animals, are genetically or, phylogenetically basal doesn't mean they're older or younger. So that's kind of helps, to make you think about it. So an animal that is younger kind of in terms of time can be more, or older, younger in time can be more basal in terms of its phylogeny or how it's related as well. So that's kind of a better way to describe it. So it seems very interesting in that regard. And this kind of, adds to the hypotheses of whether T-Rex, came from America or was from, South America, no, South America, Asia. So there's been lots of debate, and that kind of helped fuel the debate because it's most similarly related to the larger Tyrannosaurs that may have come from North America, and spread into Asia or vice versa. Most recent evidence suggests there would have been multiple dispersal events that would have had Tyrannosaurs come in and then come out and then come in and then come out, with T-Rex being kind of dispersing into America, or sometimes even argue the other way around. So it is interesting. So Tyrannosaurus' ancestors is actually, as I mentioned, nested in Asian taxa, so it may have migrated from Asia into America. That's quite interesting as well. In terms of paleobiology, not too different. It would have typically no other Tyrannosaurids had kind of this skull. They had very similar to later Tyrannosaurids. So it likely would have been very similar in that regard. Really good binocular vision and good depth perception, and maybe a great ambush predator. And having these kind of large body size and large skull with powerful muscles would have hunted like later Tyrannosaurs. In terms of paleo environment, as I mentioned, from the Wawheap, same age and time as the splitter Diabloceratops, and kind of lived with all those same species as well. So I'm not going to go too much into that because I already kind of went over that. But yeah, very rich, prey base for it to live off. And I'm going to say really, really beautiful mod from Chocolate. So yeah, so this is about end of us for part 100. So definitely a big fan of all the mods that are coming today. So yeah, I'm going to thank everyone. Thank you, Sweetener. Thank you, Chocolate. Thank you, Pete's Otter. Thank you, Viral Cyclops and Game Videos for Life for that lovely sea cow. Love to see it. Diabloceratops, we know Chocolate made the Diabloceratops and Lythronax and the Shringasaurus. You've all done wonderful jobs, and nice to see you all featured in part 100. And I hope for a couple more before Jurassic World Evolution 3 releases. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always look at little bell icons to get notified below anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.